Hey everybody, welcome to the TEConnect podcast. I'm John Martin.
And I'm Dean Reverman.
Dean, pop quiz.
Yes.
What are the first three industrial revolutions?
Oh, geez. Industry 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. No?
Well, yes, sort of. All right, my understanding, for very quick analysis here,
Yeah.
the first industrial revolution was when you mechanized the factories. You actually added machinery, but it was probably like a lot of like water, steam-powered stuff at that time.
Yep.
Maybe 1800s, I guess, mid-1800s, something like that.
Right.
Second, maybe around the turn of the 20th century, you had electricity and the assembly line, which creates
revolutionary,
automation.
absolutely.
So you have mass production at that point.
Yep.
Then let's say mid-20th century, you get into computers, automation, kind of leading up to the turn of this century, where we have now entered a fourth industrial revolution.
So they say, yes.
So they say, yes.
That's right.
I'm not going to explain too much of that yet. I'll leave that to our guest today. But that is our main topic today, is Industry 4.0 rather.
Yep.
We have Jim Foster from ELO joining us today. He's going to explain a little bit from his point of view where we are in that fourth industrial revolution. We're going to talk about, where customers are with this, when they might be ready, cues you should be paying attention to that might indicate that, hey, maybe I should be talking to him about some of this modern new age, technology and automation
Some of the
that's
stuff
out there.
that's going on out there.
Exactly. We'll talk a little bit about display technology. Obviously, that's ELO's bag. So,
in the wheelhouse. Yep.
Exactly. So, how it kind of fits in, how Android fits in. We'll get into the supply chain as a whole, too, and how it's being impacted by all of this.
How can you not talk about supply chain at this point?
Well, whether we want to or not, it's
used to be COVID. Now we talk about supply chain.
Yeah, exactly. That'll be our new dirty word for the next year or so, is the supply chain. So all of that plus our usual value to the VAR and what's TEConnecting with us. It's time to plug in and get connected.
Welcome to the TEConnect podcast. It's time to get connected.
All right, as I mentioned, our guest today is Jim Foster. Jim is a business development manager for ELO. Jim, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being on with us today. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, your world. You gave us a little bit of a hint about your personal life that maybe you might want to get into here at the beginning also, but I'll leave that up to you.
Great. Well, hi guys, and hello everyone that's watching. Yeah, thanks for your time. So my name's Jim Foster, so I'm business development manager for ELO. So my responsibilities are actually two of our growth markets. So I'm responsible for the global business development for industrial. And when we say industrial, that encompasses warehousing, transport and logistics, manufacturing, process control, all that good stuff. And then also the gaming market. So two, you couldn't really be much further apart markets. But yeah, I'm responsible for both of those, and they're really important growth markets for ELO. So, BlueStar and your VAR network, you all know that we're very strong in retail, point of sale, etc. But we do a lot of our business in the industrial market, and also it's been one of our heritage points as well. That's really the area where we started with 50 years ago. So that's something that we're trying to now grow, or we are growing as part of our growth strategy. And I've been in the role about 4 months now. So I was previously in a regional sales role responsible for our UK market. And now moving into more of a vertical responsibility. So, happy to be here today. I'm based in the UK. You can tell from my accent. I'm actually in Manchester, so not the Queen's English, much cooler than that. And yeah, one of the we talked about just before we started was about the guitars. So everybody always talks about guitars. Somebody asked me the other day, do I actually play guitar? And I was like, well, that'd be a very expensive wall decoration if you putting them on the wall if you don't play it. But I forgive them for asking. So happy to be here today and to talk about industry 4.0.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
He's in a metal band.
That was the other point there. Yes,
right,
exactly.
Yeah.
You're curious what kind of music. Yeah.
Maybe we'll get into that later. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, him and Dee might just riff on it for a while.
Right.
I'll go take a break or something. So,
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. We do want to get into this conversation about Industry 4.0. And to your point, and we'll get to that a little bit later, you're right that, maybe people don't think of ELO and display technologies being a big part of maybe like that manufacturing side or even some of the warehousing stuff. But there is obviously an important angle there that we're going to get to.
Yeah.
But let's start off, Jim, how do you define this whole Industry 4.0 and where we are right now with this fourth industrial revolution? It's kind of a sort of a vague term in a way, and I've seen a lot of different definitions, but how do you define it?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and to be honest, I thought you might try and catch me out with the what are the four. So I actually prepared for this just so I was 100% clear on what the four are, because I thought you might try and catch me out with that, but you asked Dean, so that's good. So no, yeah, you're right. I mean, the Industrial Revolution, it's actually quite something that's quite close to my heart anyway, because it actually originated in England. It was like late 1700s, and it was to do with the invention of the spinning jenny, which was a mechanical, like a foot-based mechanical contraption that was used to wind the cotton around the bobbins. And that's something that actually originated in the Manchester area. So we got this drilled into us as kids. This was Cottonopolis and all these nicknames for the city at the time, which wasn't great for the environment and all the pollution and stuff, but was great for industry. And then it exploded from there. So we're always drilled into us that this was like the home of the Industrial Revolution. So, but yeah, second one, railroad, telegraph, all that good stuff, electricity, obviously. Third one was basically computers and the silicon and all semiconductors and that resulting in computing powers and production lines. And then the fourth one really, it's a relatively new phrase, right? It's 8-10 years old, something like that. And it was coined by some German industrialists, I believe, and looking for how they can get to the next stage of efficiency savings and automation. And really, to me, what it means is about interconnectivity between devices. So it's between humans and devices, it's between devices and other devices, whether that's compute, whether that's cloud servers, sensors. You think about IoT, and we know it in the consumer world, right? So you think about the home assistants. I'm not going to say the name because she's going to react and then she's going to ask me to talk to her. I think you know what I mean.
Right.
Because I have one in my office, and it's the Echo Dot, but I won't say her name that begins with A. And we've all got those in the home, or a lot of us have got those kind of things in the home. I've got the doorbell system on the camera. I've got a heating system. I've got security alarms. It's all based from my smartphone and controllable by voice and all these things. So in the consumer world, this has been prevalent, or certainly exploding really for the last few years in my life, in the last probably 1.5 to 2 years. But in industry, it's I wouldn't say behind, but it's taken a slightly different track. But it's about interconnectivity. It's about and how those devices talk to each other, and more importantly, way more importantly, is what you do with that data. So what you do with that data and what that ultimately gives, because as any salesperson knows, you don't sell the feature, you sell the benefit, right? So what's the benefit for the end user? The benefit is increased productivity, reduced downtime, better data, which gives better decisions. Think about a factory. If you have to go and find some data on a notebook, on a piece of paper, on even a whiteboard, marker board, that takes time. You're not making the decision as quickly. The decision isn't as good. It's just not an efficient process. So it's really optimization through data on the sensor end. It's how that connects to the human, and that's really where ELO plays, to be honest. It's how that data is used by the management or the user, and then it's the benefits that are acted upon, after that as well. And it's, I think the reason why it's hard with industry and Industry 4.0, why it's hard to quantify in an elevator pitch or in one sentence, is because it's not that straightforward. There's so many elements of it. There's so much complexity around it. A bit like one of the topics we'll talk about later. It can sometimes be a bit nebulous. If you talk to somebody that's not in our industry, that's not dealing with technology and hardware in the business and enterprise world, they couldn't explain it to you probably. Most people, go down the pub, or you're at a bar, you talk to someone, you say, hey, what does Industry 4.0 mean to you? If they're not in the tech world, they wouldn't have a clue. So it's not a general term that's yet used outside of outside of us, really, or our industries.
That's a really good point, Jim. And when you think about it, and I'm glad you harped on data, because data is a key component of that. And when you think about the other industrial revolutions, I mean, like a steam engine, that's pretty straightforward.
Not a lot of data you're getting out of
Well,
that.
no, it's pretty straightforward. You got a railroad. It's transporting goods from point A to point B. Revolutionized, yes, but the pretty easy concept to wrap your head around. Well, really, Industry 4.0 has a lot of complexity to it, which I think is what you're trying to speak to, Jim. You can't do an elevator pitch on something that is so complex.
Yeah.
I mean, the analogy now is not only do we have a train, but there's sensors all over that train, determining speed, determining heat, determining all these things.
Efficiency there.
And that needs to be connected to other ERPs and other systems out there to make this efficiency work. So it's a complexity issue as well. And that really comes down to data and the ability to manipulate data. So when you think about Industry 4.0, and in my mind, it's our collective ability to harness the data and manipulate the data to achieve these efficiencies and opportunities that are out there.
Yeah. And I appreciate the fact also that you mentioned that, customers, our customers, or our VARs customers rather, and maybe even some of our VARs for that matter, are not just wandering around talking about Industry 4.0.
No, right.
Like, hey, what are we going to do with the fourth industrial revolution today? No one's having that conversation. They didn't have it during the first three either. That's just not how you talk about these things.
Right.
So then that brings me to my next question, which is, let's assume, obviously, that our customers are not talking about it in this particular manner. They're not saying, hey, we want to get on board this Industry 4.0 thing. How do we do that? What kind of things should our VARs be listening for with their customers in any, regardless of where it is, whether it's a manufacturing, supply chain, or whatever, that indicates that they're ready for some of the technologies and ready for this kind of, evolution to a higher level of, interconnectedness, data collection, analytics? What do you think they should be listening for?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because, and that's almost, you could argue, the biggest challenge in selling technology or providing technology into these markets when talking about Industry 4.0. I mean, the actual term itself. Oh, there you go. There's my home smart device telling me somebody's just delivered something. There you go. So they don't ask such broad questions. So Industry 4.0, nobody talks about that, as you mentioned, John. So, it's not like you have a conversation with the customer and say, what's your Industry 4.0 strategy? Nobody says that, right? People don't mention that. People say, oh, we want to automate. We want to add digitization to our workflow. We want to have work instructions in the manufacturing line, and that needs to be digital because some workers are remote. They're not on site anymore. They're remote. So that's something that is really important, and it's a difficult conversation. You don't have that kind of nebulous conversation. You have very specific, and I think it also depends on the customer. So if you think about, some end users might want to be doing a big data move. They might want to move factory from A to B. There might be a consultant involved. It might take 12 months to do it or longer. It's a huge, big, super complex project. The questions that the VAR or the sales supply chain would ask is a different question to somebody that says, okay, I'm a machine maker, an OEM of equipment, and I'm going to make an upgrade to my machine, and now I need a display. I need a human interface device that's then it needs to be bigger because it's more complex, for example. That's a different discussion. So I think it really depends. But and it also depends on what's happening. So if you think about, typically in technology, they're iterative upgrades, right? I mean, in the consumer world, they're not iterative. We get big hits. We get iPhone coming in and disrupting the market. You get all these smart devices coming in, disrupting the market. Consumers like to test out cool gadgets. In industry and enterprise worlds, that isn't how it works, especially industrial. The heavy end of industrial, the oil and gas, the manufacturing plants, the food processing, they're not going to take a chance on cutting edge tech, right? They're going to make a very small iterative change, step by step. Try this, try that, test, might last 6 months, pilot. It's a very, very much slower process. So it's a little bit of a cliche, and I'm kind of answering your question with a question, but what is that end user looking at? Is it a big project? Is it a small project? Is it buying a new type of machine? Is it a a data center transfer? Is it software? Is it hardware? So that's the challenge, right? How do you define what, it's the typical sales challenge. You've got to get close to the customer, define what they want, and take it from there.
I would agree with that, and you can pick up on clues when you're getting into it. I would say that a component of this question, what are they doing or asking for that can tip off a reseller that, hey, there might be an interest in what we're calling this umbrella term Industry 4.0 culture. If they have a corporate culture that embraces connecting to other partners and wanting to develop, get out of their box, if they're just an aluminum extruder and that's all they do all day is just pound out whatever this little widget, or if they're a restaurant that really is just doesn't really want to think about how they can improve their customer experience or anything like that, if they don't really have the culture, you're not really going to have a great time talking to them about Industry 4.0 type of conversations, right? One of the use cases I could say is that maybe your end user has a desire to go a little bit deeper into the solution that they're providing to their customers. So I'll give you a use case. Like, we worked for a large hospitality chain back in a previous life that I had, and we were involved in digital menu boards for that entity. And they wanted to do, even back then, this is going back a decade, they wanted to have a better customer experience. So they were thinking about integrating their point of sale systems, their food spoilage and stuff like that into the digital signage so that, there's real-time information and all those types of things. Well, that's data, right? And that's taking it to the next level. Well, if there's no desire for those types of things, it's going to be a really hard sledding for you to try to convince, for a reseller to try to convince whoever they're talking to that, they should embrace some of the things, some of these trends that are happening in the industry of Industry 4.0, if you will, and connecting it and all the things that are coming together there.
Yeah, I agree. And, what you mentioned also about the idea that companies that are reticent to make these changes and these moves, especially in the industrial space, especially in supply chain, that has come up time and time again on this show. We've had plenty of guests that have noted that hey, it's not that easy to go to somebody and say, yeah, there's this new cool technology. You want to try it out? When they go, no, because that could totally upend, disrupt my process. Like our existence and our functionality and our profitability is based on being able to churn out this widget in certain amounts, every hour of every day. And anything that stops that from happening and slows us down for even 5 minutes to flip a new switch or turn something on, and if it doesn't work for some reason and shuts us down for a day or two, is massive amounts of money that could potentially be lost. So you're right. There's a lot of little baby steps that you have to take to get there. But I do.
And it can be hard.
It can. But
it can be really hard.
But if they are of the mindset for it and their culture's in the right place and they are saying the right things, at least you can start heading that way. But yeah, understand that it may not be as simple as, all right, today they're going to be just, this straightforward standard, automation that they're already doing. And then tomorrow we're going to flip a switch and turn on connectivity and machine learning and IoT and everything's going to be great. No, it's not going to happen overnight, unfortunately.
It's iterative steps, yeah, for sure.
So Jim, let's get into what Elo obviously does best, which is display technology. So how does that fit into these spaces? When you're thinking of the heavy industrial side of things, or even on the warehousing side of things, supply chain, where do you play? How are you helping contribute to this shift in technology, and how does Android play a part in that as well?
Yeah, great question again. So it's there's a lot of use cases actually that I could probably spend 2 hours talking about use cases. I'm not going to, but there's so many different potential use cases with display tech. Now, some of them are obvious and some of them are less obvious. So the more obvious ones, if you think about a production line, and we kind of in our kind of internal Elo speak, we call it manufacturing control, and then or machine control, I should say, and then process control. So machine control would be something like a surface mount machine or a robot or a any kind of robot or machine or workstation that you are controlling it with a a program software, and you need a human machine interface. So you see the HMI, human machine interface, that phrase is bandied around a lot. But what does that mean in reality? It basically means a way for the human to interact with the machine. And historically, look at industrial machines, you've seen these big ugly buttons with like plastic covers so you don't hit them by mistake. You've got, or even some of the kind of joystick kind of robotic things like you get on forklift trucks, these kind of things. And they're great and they're super durable and reliable, but they're not flexible, right? So if that machine is doing 80% of the time function A and 20% of the time function B, the interface, the HMI, needs to flex between the different use cases. So in the past, the machine was very specific. It did one thing and one thing only. Now things are getting flexible. So if a machine's doing 10 different things, you can't have 10 different button decks or extra panels you unplug and plug. That's just not realistic. So having a touch screen, whether it's an all-in-one device or a screen connected to a separate compute, almost doesn't matter in this example. That's a really obvious use case where flexibility is controlled by software. So our touch screen is the interface to the human via touch, of course. But then the software controls where the buttons are, what you need to do to initiate them, any kind of login requirements, PIN login, facial recognition using some camera accessories that we've got, etc. So that's one obvious use case, and that's a machine controlled human interface device. Where we've not played until relatively recently, I mean, not in the last couple of years, but certainly in the last 10 years, we've started playing much more, is what we call process control. So that might be, think about a car manufacturing plant or a food processing plant where they have a process, and it's almost like, think about a kitchen display system with a bump bar where, it goes to station A or station 1. I do my part, I fry the burgers, I pass it on to the next guy who puts it in the bun, the next person puts the salad on or whatever, and you bump it from station to station. That kind of process control in a manufacturing environment, that's becoming much more popular to have touch screens. And why is that? Why can't they just do it on a notepad or just on a simple button? Well, because you need extra, again, it's flexibility, right? So think about, you're in a manufacturing line, your part is to put the wheel on, for example, and you put the wheel on and you bump it to the next person. That's fine, but what if it doesn't work? What if it goes wrong? What if there's a health and safety issue? What if you need to call a supervisor? What if you need to look at work instructions? You can, on a touchscreen, you can go hit a different tab, for example. You can look at the instructions. This is a different wheel because it's a different model, and you put it on in a different way. So the kind of touchscreen tech in this case isn't exactly the same as controlling a machine, but it's got some overlap. But it's more about quick access to data, metrics, safety triggers. If there's an issue, it can flash on the screen saying, hey, the pressure's too high, the temperature's too low, whatever metrics you might be interested in. So that's kind of the other true industrial use case. So, the machine control and then the process control, they're what we would call really kind of true industrial. But then there's a lot of stuff on the periphery of that. So think about warehouses, and from an ELO perspective, we include warehousing and data capture and all that kind of in our industrial area as well, which obviously does overlap into retail a little bit. But think about pick, pack, ship stations. I think you guys in the US call them pick, pack, ship stations, right? Normally we in the UK we call them packing benches, but yeah, same thing, right? So think about the massive move these days to online ordering and collection in store and BOPIS, you guys call it, right? So BOPIS and all this stuff. You need things in the back end, the supply chain intra-store to support that, or at least intra-supply chain to support that. And packing stations, having a little notepad and pen probably was sufficient, a few years ago or even pre-COVID. But now, if you're adding 20 seconds to that customer journey because you've got to go and get it from the warehouse, that's not a happy customer, because it's instant gratification culture that we live in, right? You do it, you choose it, you want it, you go. There's no waiting around. That's not really acceptable these days. So, that's another use case where we're seeing massive growth, is these pick, pack, ship stations in warehousing, transport, logistics, etc. And then there's also some on the peripheral. So if you think about control rooms, so control rooms in plants. Think about Homer Simpson in the Simpsons intro, where the nuclear rod falls down the back of his shirt or whatever it is. He's asleep at the desk, right, with all the different displays. That's like a classic control panel. They were historically just CCTV setups, right? There was no dashboarding in there. There was no data as such, apart from a live TV feed. That's totally changed now. So you think about even HVAC, fire, hospitals, police, any kind of law enforcement, army, military, all that kind of stuff needs control rooms, and factories are no different really. So control rooms with displays and touch screens are, again, really, really good use case. And then some stuff there which is very overlapped with the corporate world. So if you think about in a factory, they have meeting rooms, they have collaboration areas, either in a separate meeting room or also on the factory floor. So, we a lot of us have probably seen these kind of daily Scrum meetings, or the kind of daily QA meeting where you go and you crowd around whether it's the QA manager or the boss or the production leader of that cell, and they talk about the metrics of that day. When I first came out of education and started selling into these kind of markets, it was all about a whiteboard and paper printed and stuck on the whiteboard. That's not the case now. It's now digital, right? And for all the reasons we talked about, it's real-time information. You can make better decisions. You can flag up data inconsistencies. Most of the time when somebody's making a graph and printing it on a piece of paper and putting it on a whiteboard, they're manipulating the data themselves. That's not smart, right? That's just coming from them doing it manually. So that kind of collaboration thing is also really important and dashboarding on the production line. And then probably the only other use case I would mention is the mobile area and device scanning and inventory checking and stock and things like that. So, we developed our M50, a new mobile device that came out earlier this year, and that's really our first movement into the mobile area, and that's been dominated by Android devices, and that's Android. I'm kind of leading into Android here, but that's been dominated by Android devices for a long time. And there's a lot of use cases in the warehouse, whether it's inventory checking, whether it's stock rotation, whether it's even taking payment front of house is an obvious retail use case. And when you kind of loop them all together, actually we've got some tech that covers everything. Whether we've got our mobile device, it's a 5.5 inch touch screen, and then we've got up to a 65 inch touch screen, which might work in a dashboarding application. So, we have actually got technology types and products that will cover all the angles really.
And thank you for that overview. Here's the good news: is that the interactive displays are needed in so many areas of where Industry 4.0 is going. It was nice to get that overview. Thank you, Jim. And we could dive into any single one of those areas. I'm just going to pick on a couple of them that I think really truly are unique in the sense that when I'm going to go to the collaboration that you were talking about in the break rooms and stuff like that. Look, in an industrial setting, right? And we have this in our warehouse. You have workers that don't have access to computers and stuff like that, and WebEx or whatever it might be to do collaboration. So they actually have a great tool called Huddle, where it enables folks to do that, to connect and collaborate and do interactive things on the display as though it were this kind of virtual whiteboard that many people can utilize. And I mean, that is the wave of the future. How do we engage humans in the process and get it all working? That would be one of them. Mobile workstations, another one. We're seeing a huge push in mobile workstations, and the flexibility that an interactive screen gives you over keyboarding or something like that is there. It's definitely there. And then finally, the dashboard. I'm going to go back to Homer Simpson. Yeah, I mean, people in control room environments, they're asked to do so much. It's back in the day. Okay, maybe you had all these buttons and stuff like that, but there's even more data coming. Those people are not susceptible. You're not on an island where there's just not more data coming to them. There is more data, and they have to be able to manipulate between dashboards and sources and stuff like that. And so an interactive world, even telescoping up, as we've all talked about, we're all accustomed to interacting with screens and doing that. Of course, there's an application in these industries as defined.
I was just going to say the same thing. We all carry these around in our pockets. We're all used to touch technology at this point. There's no reason not to have that incorporated. It feels weird not to. And the thing is also, as the workforce gets younger and younger, but I guess as a way of saying, as the workforce that's older, that was that was in there before touchscreen has long gone. The younger generations are going to think that is the only acceptable way to interact with things. Just an example: my son, 4 years old, even at 2 years old, he had already seen enough of, phones and iPads and little tablets and stuff to think, to know that stuff was touch. And I remember like when he started watching television on a somewhat regular basis, and I'm using the Apple TV, and it's got like the app layout on my TV. He would go up sometimes and try to touch the television.
Great trick.
Thinking that's how I can make my show come on, right? Like I want to watch this show. I'm touching it. Why isn't it working, Daddy? Like, well, that's actually not a touch screen. Sorry, son, But just that instinctiveness that's already built into someone at that age tells you that like by the time he's in the workforce, if you sat him down in front of a display panel that was buttons and CCTVs and I can't imagine that would still exist by then, but if you did, he'd probably be like, no, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know how to use
What
this.
is this archaic place and why does it even exist?
Right,
So
that's right. Yeah.
very good point about that technology. Well, then Jim, you kind of hinted a little bit at supply chain as a bigger, process here. So looking at that as a whole, and obviously a lot of innovation, a lot of change has happened over the last year plus from, where we were then versus where we are now. And while, COVID itself may not be quite as the large concern as it may have been a year ago, the changes that have come about, especially in supply chain, which is the new dirty word, I guess, at the moment, as we talked about at the beginning, is is affecting how we move forward. So what do those impacts mean? How should we be asking people to step things up in manufacturing, distribution, warehousing to kind of meet the moment right now?
Yeah, that's a super important point, and it's actually a bit of a bridge between markets. So I'll use retail front of house and warehouse back of house as a real life example here. So, if you think about, we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but the click and collect or BOPIS, the curbside collection, all this kind of, thing that's been accelerated and catalyzed by COVID. I mean, they existed before, right? But they weren't kind of a mandatory expectation from the end user. They were something that was a bit of a novelty to, oh, you can order it and collect it in store. Wow, what a great idea. But why would I do that when I can go to the store? So the world's changed, and these front of house initiatives to keep the customer excited and attracted need something behind to support that. And has the front of house taken too much focus from the retailer or the service provider, and they've forgotten a little bit about back of house? Arguably, a little bit. A lot of them talk a good game about, we can optimize the customer journey, and you can order it online, click it in store. But it's been quite lumpy, and certainly my own user experience it's not been as seamless as the retailers and these big brands would make you believe. You talk about ordering it online. By the time you actually go through that online process, it's like, you can have it delivered to the store and it'll be there in 2 days. It's like, well, that's not the same as my expectation. My expectation is that you order it and I go in 1 hour and it's there, it's picked, it's already in the warehouse, and then it's just somebody take that, put it in a an area with my name on it or reference code, and then they give it me. And that's not really where it is at this point. Or some retailers obviously do a lot better than others, and they're all kind of a bit of an arms race because that's what everybody expects. But that under the underneath the tip of the iceberg, the bit under the water, so to speak, that's super important, and that's where we're seeing a lot of movement now to try and catch up with what these brands are promising the customer, because everybody's competing with Amazon, everybody's competing with somebody sat behind a piece, computer or a screen, whether it's a touch screen on a tablet or a home PC or whatever, or traveling, and you go, yep, I need that for tomorrow, order it, it'll be there next day. So much more convenient than going to a store. And of course, bricks and mortar always have their place, and they will continue to do so, but they've got to focus on the customer experience, because nobody's going to want to go to a store, stand in line, wait around, is it available, is it not? I mean, the thought to me as a consumer of going to a store and not knowing if it's in stock gives me heart palpitations. Really, I mean, the thought of it is like, well, I could drive for 30 minutes and they might not have it, then I'm not going to take that chance. Think about that 10 years ago. You just go, wouldn't you? You just go and see if they've got it. And if they haven't, you'd go somewhere else. And so the world's changed. So what does that mean in the background? So, these kind of supply chain efficiencies and digital transformation, you couldn't try it on before. So think about, shoe shop or clothes. So you want to go and try stuff on. So there's always going to be bricks and mortar for shoes or clothes, fashion. But you need to have that supply chain completely optimized. So what does that mean? You need real-time data that's completely live within the organization. So the days of, saying, oh, I'll call the next store in the next town and see if they've got stock for you, Mr. Foster. I mean, you'd laugh, right? As a consumer, if the retailer said, oh, I'm just going to make a call and see if they've got stock in that size, you'd say, what? You have to make a phone call for this? So, that's got to be seamless. So we're talking about cloud infrastructure, database infrastructure, potentially there, using your Amazon Web Services and all these kind of providers. From a hardware perspective like us, that, you've got to have that back end connected. But once you've got that back end data working, how do you then manifest that to the human? And again, that's where we step in. And is that human a staff member? Maybe. Is that human a customer? Maybe. So that might be that touchscreen is the point of sale device and has that hook to another store in another city, so you can see if they've got stock. That might be in the warehouse. That might be a stock checker where the staff member can go and check if there's stock in another location. That might be, and I use a real example. There's one of the big retailers in the US. I can't name names, but they've implemented some of our hardware into. They've actually taken the same technology from front of house with price checkers and similar applications, and actually moved it into the back of house for deliveries from direct store deliveries, as the phrase is. So that might be a vendor supplying to this brand, and they drop in their goods on a pallet, and the delivery driver checks in on in our case, it's an all-in-one device, and they either scan a QR code or they punch in a reference number, whatever it might be, and then they say, yeah, I've now dropped my one pallet of, I don't know, garden chairs or whatever it might be. It could be anything, right? And then you check in. So then it's immediately in their stock system. They know that the driver's come in. They might have a camera, might take a picture of his face, might link to the CCTV. So that kind of driver delivery check-in is one really cool use case. And the cool part about this is that it's the same hardware, exactly the same hardware that they've got front of house for price checkers and point of information, and also back office or back of house for time stamps or time clocks for the employees. It's the same tech. It might even be the same device, depending on the footfall and how busy that route is. So staff member comes in, clocks in for the day, books vacation days, whatever it might be, all through the same device back of house. So connecting everything back of house is super important. And if it's not, then ultimately the end user is going to get a bad experience, and that retailer or that brand, whatever kind of, or even just that factory supplying another brand, that they're gonna lose business because they're not keeping up. It's really an arms race.
That's it. I mean, it spiders out. If you think about it, just taking that use case of a retailer where, supplies are coming in. Well, in order for them to get efficiency, everybody in that supply chain has to be efficient. And so I like your commentary at the beginning there, Jim, is dead on. And we've talked about it, how the consumer side has definitely influenced what we always refer to as back of house. Well, what is back of house? Back of house is manufacturing. The putting together of these goods, in this case, in devising that. Well, when you think about where supply chains are today and how manufacturers are trying to step up their game and trying to be relevant to that, I think that everybody's becoming aware. Even if you're a widget manufacturer, you're aware that you are in a chain, obviously, and that chain needs visibility along the way. The only way that we're going to get more efficiency is to have greater visibility of what's happening. How it manifests itself in a manufacturer, and kind of connecting what Jim was talking about, at the production line, when we've talked about customization. Well, how is a manufacturer going to be able to pivot to customize whatever's being produced on the line unless that data is coming in real time, and an operator can make that change via a device, or via a control panel that's touch panel. Oh, we've got these 10 orders that needs this customization, execute, go. There's still a human interface in order to make that happen. We're not going to get there unless these blends of technologies happen. And yes, I'll just harp on the fact that the human interface is definitely a part of that. You can try to automate it as much as you want, but there's still a human involved, usually in the process somewhere along the way. Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. I'll make a commentary here. It's such a paradox for manufacturers right now, because they understand where their supply chain was before COVID, but man, all that is like really blowing up up right now? Where do our supplies come? Is it the just-in-time inventory? Really? Can we do that if it's sitting on a boat, in an LA dock somewhere that we can't even have access to? Really, really kind of things are in flux.
Yeah. Well, I remember a few times last year in 2020, you used to say, stuff that was on the whiteboard of the future suddenly became no, we got to figure out how to do this right now.
Yeah.
And I think there's still a lot of companies, a lot of industries that are still struggling with that. Maybe they were able to find some patchworks or some band-aids to get them through just keeping afloat and in business throughout the bulk of the worst part of the pandemic. But now that we're kind of easing back out of it, and realizing okay, I cannot go backwards. There's no backwards at this point. It has to be forward. But I've still got to figure out how do I make this a part of my regular routine workflow and processes and data points and analytics that I was not ever looking at before. And I think there's still a lot of people that are struggling with that. And I think that's where our VARs can potentially help out a little bit.
I think there's going to be a rush to nearshore and really kind of rethink supply chains, honestly. Yeah. And the only way that we're going to be able to get there and compete globally, because you can't, I don't care what country you are, you can't not think that there's a global aspect to it. You're going to have to become much more efficient at how you produce things in a local nature. So
definitely.
Yeah.
Well, let's wrap up this main conversation with a quick little talk about networking and security, because as we talk about this connected world and the cloud, automation, all this stuff requires obviously, a network obviously that's reliable. That's a big part of things. And we know that from previous conversations that a lot of these warehouses and distribution centers, manufacturing plants may not be as secure as we would expect them to be or want them to be. So, where are we with that, Jim, from your perspective? How important is all of that to making sure that we can get to the future that we're talking about here when it comes to incorporating network and security?
Yeah, I mean, it's arguably one of the most important points, because as things expand, as ideas and processes scale, then security is always, not always, often something that trails a little bit. You look at some of these horror stories you see on the news about, I think it was a company in Norway that got this ransomware hack, and they couldn't get into their system, and they basically started again from zero from the paper copies. So that's like really worst case scenario, right? I mean, those paper copies were like 9 months out of date, but it was better than zero. So, or it was better than paying, millions of dollars or whatever the ransom was. So, security is super important. I was on a webinar earlier this week from one of the prominent players in the semiconductor industry, and they talked, like a massive amount of the discussion was about security. And it's about security. It was about hardware security, physical security, but primarily software and how the hardware and software interconnect, and middleware and other elements in that stack. So it's really important. And if you think about what happens when something's hacked, what about a power cut? What about a server failure? What about a failure of the cloud provider? Or when you make everything interdependent, it becomes even more critical that they all work in harmony. And if one point fails, you've either got to have some very, very robust redundancy things in place, or it turns bad, right? Then it can basically, everything goes down. Again, I always like to compare things to consumer, the real world, or as the personal world. We're all working from home now, or a lot of people working from home. If your internet goes down, you can't really do very much. So you're this critical point of failure that is okay. It's not life or death at home, but in an industry where you're losing $100,000 a minute if you're not manufacturing something, then that's a big problem, right? So security in terms of our kind of hardware is also super important, and that's something that we really like to push when we're talking to our customers about Android. So I know we did talk about Android a little bit earlier, but just to kind of recap on it. So, it's not our only solution, but it is definitely what we see as a future huge growth area for us, and it's already a huge part of our business. So, Android all-in-one devices in retail have been super relevant and prominent for a few years now. 7, 8, 9 years, something like that. Look at all the self-service restaurants and things, and things like that. industry's been a bit slower to adopt Android for a couple of reasons. One is because of the things we talked about, general conservatism in industrial market. They don't want to go into, to say, bleeding edge technology. Windows and Linux have been the stalwarts of industry for a long time, especially some of these custom Linux distributions, which are very, very specific for certain use cases, and moving on from them will take many years to come. But also Android is super secure out of the box, right? And that's something that we can't really overstate. So, with our Android enterprise devices, Android out of the box, whether it's, our older devices on Android 7 and 8, or the new generation that are coming out that are on Android 10, our fourth generation that are on Android 10, the security that you get out of the box, and especially with some of our premium packages, you get all the security patches for a certain amount of time. You can get what we call OS 360, which is like an extended care package on the OS and the security updates. And you've got that, the user's got a really strong peace of mind that it's an ecosystem that's used in the consumer world and the enterprise world, industrial, commercial, whatever you want to call it. So it's been, managed and maintained by one of the largest companies in the world, and super smart ecosystem. So, it's not only about Android, but we see a massive benefit of the Android ecosystem when it comes to security.
Yeah, and that's so critical moving forward. I mean, you read the news stories, everybody understands what's happening out there. If you're not involved, we've talked about security here before, if you're not sensitive to it, involved in it, have it as a good solution, as a part of your tech stack, shame on you. Because, at the end of the road, you have to be the solution provider to end users who they themselves are not immune to the stories that are going on and things of that nature. So it's a complex web, but it's definitely something that has to be worked out.
Definitely. And I think it's important to understand too that I think the hackers are starting to evolve a little bit, where it's not about username password hacks anymore. Yes, that stuff still happens, but when that stuff happens, it's on the whole smaller scale. Best case scenario, you get the password and username for somebody that has the same information that they used for their bank account as they used for their Facebook or something, and sure, that can be helpful. But these hackers, they know that the big money now is in this whole ransomware thing. They know that crippling an organization for even a small amount of time, and if they're willing to pony up the money for it to get back into business, that's big money that they can potentially get out of it. So
which is insane.
It really is. It truly is. But, and again, and you're talking about something that goes beyond just single individuals or, the bad press that you get out of, a hack of user information necessarily, to stuff that, like, in a hospital, you run a ransomware attack on a hospital, that's a potential life and death situation that could be potentially happening there. So, again, I think that's a great conversation to have with companies about, look, this is not just about protecting user data anymore. Of course, we want to help you do that, but this is about protecting your enterprise as a whole and protecting your business as a whole that maybe could not survive even a few hours of a particular attack. So let's talk about
Most companies can't go a couple of days of being completely down.
Exactly.
No.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, hey, this has been a great conversation. Before we wrap things up here, I do want to quickly, as always, thank our sponsors, of which Elo is one. We appreciate your support of the show. We could not do this without you. Hey, if you want to reach out to us, if you have thoughts about topics that you want us to get into on the show.
What's
in the future.
on your mind?
What's on your mind? What are you interested in? Do you have some additional thoughts on Industry 4.0? Reach out to us. One thing you can do is, if you're watching on YouTube, like the video, subscribe to our channel, leave us a comment. If you listen on a podcatcher of your choice, if it's Apple Podcasts in particular, you can do a 5-star rating and review for us. We'd love to hear from you and know what you think of the show. Or you can reach out to us directly. You can find us on Twitter at TEConnectPod. You can also email us, TEConnect@BlueStarInc.com. All right, let's wrap things up. First of all, with the value to the VAR. This is our kind of takeaway, something maybe you can do immediately or work on in your business. And in particular, Jim, I want you to talk a little bit about Elo here. And I think you've kind of hinted at this a lot, but tell us about, how do you help VARs in the industrial sector, warehousing, supply chain? Where do you step in to help with this transition to this 4.0 and all these new technologies we've been discussing?
Yeah, so we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I think, the problem is that it's such a broad spectrum in terms of Industry 4.0. There's so many different facets and use cases. And, I would add to that as a slight caveat is that a lot of the VAR ecosystem, as you guys know, of course, might be quite specialized. So, that some of them are not that broad, some of them may be specialized. So they maybe have already gone down a certain path to an extent where they know what they know and they're a little bit siloed. That said, not always. Sometimes it is, as new technology comes along, sometimes it's all wide open and people are, VARs are moving into different spaces and covering new accounts that they can dig deeper in. So, where can ELO help? So that's something that I have to say we've really got down to a T is in terms of our product portfolio and the usability and interoperability. So we have a phrase that we use internally, so unified architecture. So what we mean by that, it's think of it like a Lego blocks, the building systems. Am I allowed to say Lego blocks? Is that proprietary?
Yeah.
I just did. So think of it like the building blocks. So you can if you take, for example, a use case where it's a 10-inch touch display and that user is using it as an access control display to put in your passcode, to scan your badge, facial recognition, whatever it might be, to let you into the factory. That's one use case. In the factory, you might then have the same device, but a 22-inch version running a different software for process control. And that the user's going to get the same look and feel. They're going to get the same touch feel on the glass. They're going to get the same touch performance because it's from us. It's going to be the same tech under the hood. It's going to work on the network in the same way. It's going to the same reliability. It's going to be controlled by the same device management system, our ELO View device management system, and the apps will work on it. If it works on the 10-inch, it'll work on the 22-inch. So what we're very good at is building an ecosystem that we know all works together. It all plays nicely together, and we can help the VARs explore that with the customer. Because it's very often not about single use cases. Almost all of our end customers in this space have more than one use case. It's very, very rare that they would say, I've got this one specific use case. They go to their chosen VAR or partner and say, help me with this, and then we help the VAR and we build a solution together. Very often you can kind of cross-sell a little bit and say, well, what about this use case? What about that? What about dashboarding? What about control room? And people that start off thinking about the heavier end of industrial, whether it's machine control, process control, if the VAR has the right conversations with them, you can then add on dashboarding, you can add on control room, you can add on access control, you can add on smart displays in the elevators, for example, you can add on temperature control in the control room. So there's loads of other use cases around that. So what I'd say is, we've got two strong benefits there from ELO as a vendor. One is our hardware all plays nice together. It's all in this unified architecture, this ecosystem, this building block approach. And then as a business, we treat it holistically. So we look at the bigger picture. We don't have, if the VAR was talking to their ELO representative or their BlueStar representative or both, we're not going to go down and say, okay, Jim's going to come and help you with the process control, and then we'll get John to come and help you with this, or Dean will come and help you with this. We treat it holistically as the overall solution. So I think that'd be, if we gave one message to your VAR network and ecosystem is, we can help with multiple use cases. We've got this building block ecosystem, this unified architecture, and don't think narrow, think wide.
Yeah, and I'll lump onto that, in the ecosystem, and thanks for bringing that up, Jim. We've talked about it, the ISVs, or we call technology software companies as well. They're really tapped into that whole ecosystem as well, and that plays a really important role. So not only is the hardware flexible beyond belief and really makes you quite nimble as a reseller on that front, but they also have those types of resources behind the scenes. So
as always, you're not alone, you're not an island.
Bingo. Yep.
All right, hey, let's wrap things up with what's TEConnecting with you. This is our fun segment where we get to talk about something in the world of tech, science, innovation that's got our eye, has our attention, or could make you question the future of humanity, which I think Jim's particular one here might be a little bit of the latter, at least to me. I don't know.
What we got?
I'll let him tell you. Jim, what's TEConnecting with you right now?
Yeah, so when we talked about this, I thought that the one thing that popped into my mind, and it's basically because it's very relevant these days, is this whole thing about the metaverse. So
Uh-huh.
I was thinking to myself, you see these announcements by Facebook. They've renamed the parent company to be Metaverse. What is it, Systems or Solutions? And I was thinking, if somebody asked me what it was, I don't think I could give a succinct explanation of what it is. And I was thinking it's augmented reality. It's the internet next generation. Is that internet 4.0 or 10 or whatever?
Right.
And it's got some kind of VR, augmented reality element to it. And there are obvious applications from a entertainment perspective, right? Virtual reality is already going down that path with gaming, in terms of think about The Sims and all those a few years ago, and then now there's the virtual reality versions of that, and entertainment in terms of the 3D movies and the virtual reality elements there. But real world applications that are actually going to enhance our lives outside of entertainment, I was struggling a little bit to how to say to explain to a third party if somebody asked me. But if like my dad asked me, for example, and said, so how's that going to benefit like people outside of entertainment? At this point, let's say a couple of days ago, I wouldn't know, but I've been thinking about it since, and I thought, you think about industry, digital twin, the idea of being able to, which again is really just augmented reality. This metaverse for me is a little bit making a phrase for the sake of making a phrase. Augmented reality showing what something looks like without being in it, as a way of repairing something, or think about meltdown in a nuclear reactor, and you've got to go and fix something, and you can see where the problem is due to all the sensors and cameras, and space stations doing repairs, or guiding somebody's surgery. These augmented reality in surgery applications with doing it using robots, and you're looking on a camera and moving the robot. Your hands are not actually inside the patient. So I get it, but I'm a little bit struggling to understand the excitement of Facebook to say they're banking their whole future on it at this point.
I think I need help here too, John.
Yeah,
John Cluson, you're usually really good at kind of.
I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure myself because
I've been in a cave like the last couple
it definitely feels
weeks.
very out of. I'm not going to say out of left field, but to Jim's point, yes, there is the technology behind what we're talking about here. It does have some amazing and fascinating ramifications, I think, that are very useful. Like you said, the digital twinning, surgery type stuff, all these. There's a lot of great places I think that AR is going to impact our future.
Sure.
I just find it interesting that at a time when Facebook is facing a lot of controversy and a lot of internal strife, they suddenly decide to rebrand and hitch their wagon to this whole metaverse thing. And it just... It does.
So they're creating a metaverse? Is that what's happening?
I don't honestly know.
Seriously,
exactly.
I have not paid attention at all to the release that they did. I heard the name change.
All I've seen is the memes and like the weird ways that Mark Zuckerberg's face looks all the time when he's announcing
in
this
metaverse.
Stuff. Yeah, well, in reality too.
In reality, I gotcha.
But it is such a weird, like there is definitely some useful technology behind all of this that is important. But to Jim's point, I don't understand where Facebook fits in, other than just, hey, let's just create another place, but make it like a virtual world instead, where we can have conversations. And
I see.
Does it all end up in the same place? Are we just sitting around virtual tables together, sharing cat memes and disinformation and whatever weird garbage,
just like we've been doing on Facebook anyway?
Exactly.
Right.
Like, does the feed just become, I don't know, like a virtual
Well, now
table
they can
or
control
something?
it even more because it's their metaverse and they can.
Yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens next year, if this is just one of those things they're just throwing out there to see if it sticks, or if this actually becomes.
Well, no, but to Jim's point, I mean, they're putting the whole company's future behind it, right? I mean, you don't do a name change and all this stuff unless you're seeing. All right, I got to read the press release. I got to figure out.
I'm sure somehow, some way, it all
doing?
ends with us giving up more of everything that we are to,
Oh, either that or they'll be laughed out of the world. And
that's true. Yeah, exactly.
Well, that kind of feeds into my TEConnecting, which is, I was reading up on an article about the Great Firewall of China. And it's, China's really up on my radar right now. Just a lot of things.
Isn't there another company that just pulled, was it YouTube that pulled? No, somebody just, like another major tech company just pulled out of China today, announced they were pulling out.
Well, I mean,
LinkedIn did recently. Very well.
Well, they got kind of kicked out. So it's fascinating. I'm telling you, there's a lot going on with the whole as it relates to China. I'm just going to leave it at that. But it is fascinating about how the firewall in China works, in the sense that, they have just created, their own environment and blocked everybody out. And so it's things that you would think of that would be kind of easy. You are filtering, right? So they're just going to block YouTube. So nobody in China can go to youtube.com. There's DNS poisoning is a technique that they use. So when users connect to websites, computers will contact a DNS server, but the firewall works to poison the DNS response, returning a corrupt address. So they're using that technique. Self-censorship. According to laws and regulations, Chinese firms are responsible for their content, and violation will be led to harsh penalties. So there's that. Manual enforcement. I like this one. Hundreds of thousands of civilian workers are employed all over China to enforce censorship. So they have hundreds of thousands of people that are manually going in there and flagging stuff.
Right.
Now they do say they're using AI technology right now to monitor some of that process, but can you imagine that? I mean, hundreds of thousands workers. Yeah. And then the creme de la creme, blocking VPNs. So, of course, if you're a journalist or something like that, you get into China, I'll just use this VPN as my secret way of getting out there. No, they got people, and the term was trying to climb over the wall. If you're in country, how do you climb out of the wall? Nope, they got that figured out too. They block they're sniffing around for VPNs, and anything that's happening there, they're shutting that down too. So it's this holistic attack, if you will, on how to protect, in their eyes, the citizens from external information. But it's just fascinating.
And it's wild to think that this is one of the world's superpowers. Like a North Korea that does this kind of stuff, that clamps down on this, on anything coming in or out or whatever. Granted, they are potentially a powerful country, in other ways, but it's still, all things considered, a small kind of country.
Yeah.
But yes, to your point, now, when we're talking one of the world's top 2 superpowers here, that has this kind of clamp down and control, it's kind of scary.
And the commentary also gets into the distortion of that it's having on the society over there, and how they're seeing a myopic view, and how do you do that and still plug into the whole supply chain and deal with the global world? I'm telling you, man, there's a lot there that needs to be unpacked and will be over the next coming years. What's TEConnecting with you? So, it's not a firewall.
It's not. But honestly, kind of related to our main topic today, a part of the 4th Industrial Revolution is 3D printing.
Yes.
So here's an interesting article I just came across this morning. Dubai achieves world record for first 3D printed laboratory.
A whole laboratory?
A whole laboratory. They won the Guinness World Record for a first 3D printed laboratory. It's the Dubai Electricity and Water Authority, or DUWA. They have a robotics and drone laboratory in Dubai that they have built all out of 3D parts. Everything was put together by 3D components. They're talking about how this reduces construction wastes, tool-related costs, minimized design to production time, and I think they're doing stuff where they're building prototypes and spare parts to support the government, economic, health, and scientific sectors. So just, a cool new application, that one of those things that I think probably will get broader and broader and bigger over the years.
So it's like, hey, we need a lab over here. Oh, yeah, got it.
Yeah, we got it. We'll 3D print it and put it together. It'll be infinitely cheaper, and all the parts will be 3D printed. If something breaks down, we can go and 3D print a replacement pretty quickly. So
that's kind of cool. Yeah. Not the electronics, but just the space in the lab. Because here I'm envisioning in my head, this lab space, got electronics and stuff like that. But
and as always, I'll put the link in the show notes for this article because you can see some inside shots. Of
the laboratory. Do they? They got it. Yeah.
And I mean, it looks like your standard kind of lab. There's nothing special about it. I mean, the exterior kind of looks very simplistic. It kind of has this simplistic kind of almost it's almost got an igloo kind of look, like a giant design igloo kind of thing sort of to it. But who cares? It's a functional structure that does have some interesting appeal to it.
Does it come with lab coats?
I don't know about that. I don't know if they've 3D printed those or not. So we'll see. I'm sure they could.
You got to have the gear, right? Yeah. I mean, how can you not have the gear?
All right, Jim Foster from ELO. Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate having you on the show.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you for your time, guys. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, until next time, keep climbing that firewall and stay connected, folks. By now, you probably know that adding touchscreens at check-in and throughout the care journey has a big impact on patient experience in healthcare. But what about the providers themselves? Give them the technology they need with ELO O3 series medical-grade touchscreen monitors. Merging ELO's best-in-class touch technology with DICOM 14 functionality enhances clinical review, improves workflows, and eliminates common keyboarding and point-click errors. Compact, clean designs make these monitors perfect for EMR documentation, image viewing, clinical collaboration, lab and pharmacy work, and much more. To learn more about these built-to-last monitors, check out the link in the show notes or contact the BlueStar ELO team.